Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
The empire has officially crumbled. Diddy, once the face of unstoppable power and wealth, has now become the image of fear, pain, and desperation. Reports from deep inside the prison walls paint a picture so shocking that even his closest allies are struggling to believe it.
Will Sean Diddy Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. Circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what, we did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations, that's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult.
They say the man who once ruled the music industry has broken down completely, both physically and emotionally, after a terrifying and brutal attack behind bars. This isn't just another rumor. This isn't a story of a celebrity who's fallen from grace. This is a full-blown nightmare that's spiraling out of control. And now, his legal team is scrambling, filing emergency motions, begging the court for mercy, pleading for Diddy's release before it's too late. Sources close to the situation have revealed that the attack happened late one night, inside the very cell block where Diddy had been transferred for safety reasons. But ironically, that's where everything went wrong. According to multiple insiders, tensions had been brewing for days. Inmates whispered about Diddy's past, the scandals, the money, the headlines. Some saw him as a target, someone famous, someone who still had connections and power, someone who didn't belong in the same world as them. And in prison, that kind of reputation doesn't make you safe, it makes you a mark. Witnesses say it started with an argument, words exchanged, a confrontation that
She, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, because I did. This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering.
Escalated fast. Within seconds, fists were flying, shouts echoed down the corridor, and chaos erupted. Diddy tried to fight back, but there were too many. By the time guards arrived, it was over. The damage was done. They say he was left bleeding, shaken, and silent, his face bruised, his hands trembling. He didn't say much. just kept muttering the same words over and over. I can't stay here. I can't stay here. That moment, the look in his eyes, apparently said it all. The man who once ruled the world now looked like someone who'd lost everything. Guards immediately rushed him to the infirmary, and that's when the phone calls started. His lawyers, his team, his family. The story spread fast, too fast for the system to contain it, and before dawn, his legal representatives were already preparing an emergency motion, citing grave safety concerns and credible threats to Diddy's life behind bars. One insider close to his legal circle said, "They know he can't survive this. Every day he stays there, the risk grows. The attack was bad, but it's not the only threat. The tension in that place is unreal."
Served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him. Even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence will be. But, are we looking at double digits? Are we looking, you think, at 1 to 5 years, time served? I know it's so impossible to ask, but it is a very specific charges he was convicted of.
Yeah, we're not looking at double digits.
Okay.
I cannot imagine the court imposing that. And remember, because this law is so old, and we're in an age of Uber. So literally, somebody in New York City, a man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen, multiple instances he was doing it, not one Uber, he was doing it multiple times. You have 2 alleged victims here, Cassie, Jane, and violence, right? He used violence as one of the reasons to deny him bail. I wonder if he's going to look at, even though he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, different characteristics and components of his relationships with Jane and Cassie and say, this is aggravated.
It's a very interesting question. Can the court aggravate nonviolent offenses that he was convicted of, which are the Mann Act violations? Can he aggravate those when he was acquitted of the more serious charges, essentially acquitted of everything that involved violence, threats, all of that sort of thing? So It's a very, very interesting legal question.
Real quick, asset forfeiture. What is that exactly? How would it work with Mann Act convictions?
I just don't see the feds having it being on very strong ground to seize a bunch of assets. And here's why, Jesse. Most of the federal cases where you have, especially RICO cases, an actual RICO case is an actual corrupt organization that the purpose is, like I had one in Salt Lake City last year. It was a fraud case where it was one of these calling room scam operations. Every dollar that they made in that, they made out of the bank account of some poor innocent victim who got scooped up in their scheme. So every dollar, everything they bought, every car, every house, everything that they owned was a direct result of money that they gleaned from innocent people. Those are the cases, or narcotics. We see this all the time in narcotics cases where but it's the same principle. All the things that they have are a result of narcotics profits, right? So when you look at one of those cases, you're seizing assets. Here we've got mansions all over the place. We've got planes. This is a very, very wealthy man who made that money legitimately in Bad Boy Records, in the music industry and in the film industry. That's how he made his money, and that is not a product. And that's where we come full circle to this square peg and round hole regarding a RICO theory on this. The money, he didn't make any money from the freak offs. He didn't make any money from all of the alleged things he did. He didn't make any money from that horrible video that we saw where he's beating Cassie in that hotel. That's not the source of his income. So I think, again, I don't think that the feds or even the court, I don't think the court would look kindly on that. And there's an old adage in the law that you and I've talked about before. Bad facts make bad law, right? And if they run around and try to seize a bunch of stuff based on this, they're literally taking assets from a citizen that earned them legally. He may be a villain, he may be a bully, he may be a horrible person, but he made that money legally. He was not charged here with tax fraud, which means he paid taxes on it.
Reports claim that even after medical treatment, Diddy hasn't spoken much. He barely eats. He barely sleeps. His usual arrogance, the confidence he carried like armor, is gone. In its place is fear, and a kind of quiet dread that no one has ever seen from him before. The guards describe him as numb. They say he sits in his cell, eyes unfocused, rocking slightly, whispering to himself. Sometimes he stares at the floor for hours. Sometimes he just mutters under his breath about people coming for him. The trauma is written all over his face. And now, the world is starting to see it too. His team's legal filings have gone public. Documents confirm that Diddy's lawyers are pushing for an emergency hearing, arguing that his imprisonment poses an immediate and unjustifiable risk to his safety and mental well-being. They're demanding that he be either transferred to a high-security isolation unit or temporarily released while his appeal is processed. The motion describes the environment.
He's got
Yeah, no,
accountants,
you're
he
right. I
put it
get
all
you.
together. So I don't see this judge. I think it'd be a very poor move if they try to take a bunch of his stuff. I think that they still have to create a nexus between the Mann Act
I don't see
violations
it. Yeah, I don't see it.
and his property, and I just don't see it.
I don't see it. Okay, well, he might need the money. Why? Because he's got a plethora of civil lawsuits that he's facing now. By the way, in fact, Tenny Garagos had something to say about that yesterday.
Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. I've been saying this for months. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true. The media got it wrong about Sean Combs every single day for nearly 2 years. I ask that for every time you guys see a civil lawsuit, criminal complaints or criminal indictments, you actually take a look and analyze these and see whether or not these are actually going to stand up in a court of law, because today they did not.
So Sean Combs, he is facing dozens of sexual assault lawsuits. In fact, Vulture recently clocked it at 66 women, men, minors, drugging, sexual assault, violence. Matt, first of all, does the criminal case have any effect on the civil suits? And let me just ask you about this. You have at least one of the people who testified in this case who's a plaintiff, right? Dawn Richard, former Danny Kane band member, claims she saw Combs assault Cassie. Combs threatened her allegedly when she tried to intervene. She claims she was sexually harassed. So the idea of the criminal case affecting any of the civil cases, let's start there real quick.
Well, what's very interesting about civil versus criminal cases is when somebody's convicted, of course, in a criminal case, because the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, it's called collateral estoppel. It means that for a civil case based on the same event or the same actions, you automatically win the civil case. Okay, so in other words, we saw this with Mike Tyson and his rape conviction, right? When he was convicted of rape, because it was beyond a reasonable doubt, and because the civil aspect only requires proof to a preponderance, that woman a million years ago when that case happened, all she had to do is prove damages. So it's already been proven. All right. What happened here, because he was acquitted of all these allegations, now each one of these plaintiffs bears the burden of proof. So this was not only a huge win for him criminally, this was a big win for Sean Combs when it comes to all those pending civil suits, because now those same people, in theory, would have to come in and testify. And remember, Don Richard is a good example. The cross-examination of Don Richard was excellent in my assessment. And I trained young prosecutors for years on how to do cross-examinations. I've taught it in law schools. That cross-examination was biting and it was really good. So now Don Richard, in her case, she's been really, ripped apart, I thought, on cross-examination in this case. So now she's kind of wounded. Her civil suit is that's her statements are all admissible in that. She really there's some things she said on the stand that I think were very harmful to her case. She can still proceed with that, but if I'm her plaintiff's lawyer, I would be trying to find some sort of settlement and number. Who knows? These people, there's a lot to be said for this idea that they were all jumping on the bandwagon trying to get money. I think that argument, most judges are going to allow the defense to make that argument. I think that some of them will settle. Some of them may still go to trial.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. If they don't settle, real quick, would he just try to get rid of them?
Inside as volatile and life-threatening, and insists that Diddy has already been subjected to targeted violence due to his celebrity status and the nature of the charges against him. The public reaction? Divided, but intense. Some people are saying this is karma, that a man who allegedly inflicted pain on others is now getting a taste of his own medicine. Others are calling for compassion, saying no one deserves this kind of brutality, no matter what they've done. But one thing's for sure, the image of Diddy crying in pain, begging for safety, has shocked everyone. Insiders reveal that his family has been in constant contact with the legal team. His mother, Janice, is said to be terrified. His sons, Christian and Quincy, are reportedly struggling to process what's happening. They can't visit as freely as they want to. They can't see him whenever they please. And every phone call from the facility comes with anxiety. Will this be the call that changes everything? Sources close to the situation claim that Diddy's once loyal circle has scattered. The phones have gone quiet. The friends who used to fill
a comeback that could be crafted and created, and which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight, for decades. Okay. And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous, and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR so that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, what, I am a changed person? But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused or, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things, and there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. Mm-hmm. The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen, but it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when
his mansion have disappeared. The business partners who praised him have gone silent. And in that silence, the weight of what's happening is hitting him harder than ever. They say he's haunted by guilt, by flashbacks, by names and faces from his past. He's said to be fixated on moments, people he wronged, choices he made, lives he touched. The arrogance that used to fuel him has been replaced by regret. For the first time in his life, he's being forced to sit with everything he's done, and there's nowhere left to run. Reports from inside the prison say he's constantly asking the guards if his lawyers have called. He asks about the motion. He asks when the hearing is. He asks if anyone from the outside has said something about him. And every time he doesn't get the answer he wants, he shuts down completely. The inmates, meanwhile, are watching. Some see him as broken. Some see him as weak. Others see an opportunity. But everyone knows, Diddy's time inside has turned into a dangerous game. And after that last attack, it's clear that his life could truly be at risk.
Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake-up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in
Yeah.
the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look how far he has fallen. Now, at the same time, you have that going on. And so people can look, if you really look at the case, and not just the legal case, but the case in the court of public opinion. And victims, if you will, won. Because he has, not only did he have a criminal case he had to deal with, but he has upwards of 20, 30 civil cases
I think
that
even
he's
more
also
than
going to have
that.
to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each one of those cases, even if it's not proved by the victim that it happened, he is still going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees for each and every single case, and maybe millions for the more serious and those that get further down the line. So he's not done paying for his transgressions. And I think that for other people who are in similarly situated positions of power and influence, they certainly took notes from the Diddy trial and figured out, hey, if I continue to act like a pig,
Yeah.
pigs get slaughtered.
Yes, they do. And I just remember even in the outcome of the Sean Combs lawsuits that were filed, even probably before he was indicted, we were hearing and seeing more civil suits filed against other people. And even after this
Yes.
case, we've seen more high-profile figures have complaints against them, like Tyler Perry and Shannon Sharp and Smokey Robinson, all of which have denied the allegations against them. But I do think that a lot more people are willing to come forward, even if they're anonymous or even if they're willing to put their name out there too. But I'm curious, Adante, if you had a crystal ball, what are you expecting out of Diddy's October sentencing? Do you think it'll be kind of in the high max range or possibly on the lower end? I believe federal prosecutors are only asking for 4 years. The defense wants half of that, 2 years, possibly with a year of time served. So he could possibly be out next year around this time. But what are you expecting out of the sentencing?
Yeah, I don't see the judge giving him 4 or 5 years. If the prosecution asks for that time. So now that's kind of like the judge to go beyond that would have to find something that was aggravating in his mind to say, look, I'm going to give you more time than what the prosecution is even asking for. That doesn't happen, but it does happen at times. And it's pretty rare, but it's certainly something that's on the table. I just don't see that happening here. Instead, the judge could come down with a sentence, 2 years, 3 years. Diddy, by the time he shows up in court for sentencing, will have a year and a month in custody. So he's going to get credit for that time. The judge could give him 3 years. That means he has about 2 years or so left. And then he could send him to a halfway house for a year and a day, and Diddy would be out with credit time served.
The correctional staff have reportedly increased security around his cell, with more frequent checks and restrictions on who can get close. But even that doesn't guarantee safety. In prison, all it takes is a moment, a blind spot, a shift change, a quick distraction, and everything can go wrong again. For now, Diddy's legal team is doing everything they can. Emergency filings, phone calls to federal judges, public statements to spark pressure. They're saying this isn't just about comfort, it's about survival. One of his attorneys reportedly said, If something isn't done soon, we may be talking about a tragedy instead of a case. But behind all the legal drama and public statements, one image keeps spreading: a broken man in a cold cell, whispering to himself, eyes swollen from tears, staring at the walls that now define his life. This is not the Diddy the world remembers. This is not the man in designer suits, walking red carpets, surrounded by flashing lights and champagne bottles. This is Diddy stripped of everything: his fame, his power, his illusion of invincibility. And for the first time, he's realizing that none of that matters anymore. He's realizing that when the lights fade, when the crowds vanish, and when the doors close, you're left with nothing but your reflection. And for Diddy, that reflection is terrifying. The man who built an empire from music now trembles in a cell, begging for freedom. The man who once said can't stop, won't stop, is now whispering, please, make it stop. Insiders say that since the attack, he's been more fragile than ever. He cries often, he apologizes to guards, he's become withdrawn, suspicious, fearful of everyone. The guards say it's like watching someone unravel in slow motion. His lawyers are racing against time. They've requested medical evaluations, psychological assessments, and emergency protective custody. Every document they file paints a clearer picture. Diddy is on the edge. And yet, the world outside is divided. Some want justice to run its course. Others say this has gone too far. But whether you believe he deserves this or not, one thing is undeniable: Diddy's fall from grace is unlike anything we've ever seen. From penthouses to prison cells, from mogul to inmate, from untouchable to terrified. This isn't just the story of a man losing control, it's the story of what happens when power, pride, and pain collide, and the illusion of control finally breaks. The motion for his release is now in the hands of the court, but as days pass, and as the world watches the chaos unfold, one question grows louder: will Diddy make it out alive? Because behind those prison walls, one thing's become clear: every hour he stays inside could be his last.